Get away from the door, Flora whispered sharply, her voice tight with fear as she gripped the kitchen knife with both trembling hands. Please, a man's voice called from the hallway, muffled by the howling wind that rattled the building. I'm not here to hurt anyone. My son needs help. Flora's heart hammered against her ribs. Through the fogged peephole, she could make out the silhouette of a man, broad-shouldered, hunched protectively over something smaller. A child. Snow swirled violently around them in the dim hallway light. Her fingers tightened on the deadbolt. I don't let strangers into my apartment, she thought, her jaw clenched. Especially not men. There was a beat of silence. Then the voice came again, softer this time, more desperate. I understand. I wouldn't ask if there was any other choice. He's sick. He's freezing. We just need one night, somewhere safe from the storm. Flora hesitated. The cold had already begun seeping through the old wooden window frames of her basement apartment. The radiator had stopped working an hour ago, and the small space heater in the corner was the only thing keeping the room from becoming unbearable. She glanced at her phone on the table. No signal. No one to call. Just her, and now them. She looked through the peephole again. The man shifted slightly, revealing a small boy curled in his arms. The child coughed, a deep, rattling sound that cut through the wind. That sound made her decide. With a loud creak from the old lock, Flora opened the door. Snow immediately gusted inside, chilling her ankles through her thin socks. The man stepped forward just enough for her to see him clearly. He was tall, completely soaked, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. The boy in his arms had his face buried in the man's coat, his small body shivering violently. Get inside. Quickly, Flora muttered, stepping aside. Thank you, the man said quietly, carrying the boy inside without hesitation. She slammed the door shut behind them and locked it. Sit by the heater. Don't touch anything else. The man obeyed, moving with careful precision as he gently lowered the boy onto Flora's worn couch and unzipped his own jacket to wrap it around the child instead. Flora watched closely, still gripping the knife at her side. Your name? She asked firmly. Antonio, he replied, not looking up. And this is Barella. He's 6. He has a bad cough, maybe the flu. Maybe, she scoffed. You're dragging a child through a blizzard. That's reckless. Antonio looked down, brushing wet hair from Barella's pale forehead. We had nowhere else to go. Flora paused, then turned toward the narrow kitchenette. I have dry towels. And instant soup. That's all. He nodded. That's more than enough. She returned with the towels, handing them over without stepping too close. He took them gratefully and began drying Barella with a father's quiet care. Flora stood across the room, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She hated this, the unannounced visitors, the uncomfortable memories. A year ago, she trusted someone who knocked with kind eyes and lost nearly everything. Now this stranger was in her home. Why are you out here anyway? She asked. There's nothing for miles around Lincoln Park in weather like this. The storm's been on the news for days. Antonio looked up, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. I was trying to get Barella to his grandmother's house across the city. The roads closed behind us. Then the car died. She studied him in the dim light. He looked ordinary, not dangerous, but not entirely honest either. There was something guarded in his expression, something he wasn't saying. But the boy... Barella coughed again, weaker this time. Flora exhaled sharply and walked back to the kitchen. Chicken noodle it is, she muttered under her breath. Minutes later, she brought 2 steaming mugs to the couch. Antonio thanked her softly. She handed Barella's mug directly to him, then sat on the far side of the room, her back against the wall. The silence that followed was heavy but not unfriendly. Just the sound of the space heater humming, the occasional clink of a spoon against ceramic, and the wind howling like a ghost outside the window. Barella slowly drifted to sleep, his head resting on Antonio's lap. Flora stared at the floor, forcing herself to stay awake. You don't have to be afraid, Antonio said quietly. I'm not afraid, she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. You let two strangers into your home in the middle of a storm. I'd say you're braver than you think. Or foolish, she said with a bitter half-smile. Then I'd say the same about myself, Antonio replied, the corner of his mouth lifting. It was the first time the room felt a little less cold. One night, Flora said firmly, meeting his eyes. By morning, the storm should ease. Then you leave. Antonio nodded slowly. One night. That's all we need. She looked over at the boy's sleeping face, then back at the man who held him so carefully. For the first time in a long time, Flora wondered if opening the door had been a mistake, or the first right thing she'd done in years. The wind screamed against the windows like something alive, rattling the glass in its frame. Flora pulled the thin curtain closed and turned back to find Antonio watching her, not staring, just observing with that same unsettling calm he'd worn since stepping inside. The radiator's broken, she said flatly. Stay close to the heater. And don't wander around. Understood, he replied, adjusting Barella's position so the boy's head rested more comfortably against the armrest. Flora grabbed her phone from the counter and checked it again. Still no signal. She pulled up the weather app. Last update from 2 hours ago showed red warnings across the entire region. Blizzard conditions. All transit suspended. She set the phone down harder than she meant to. Antonio glanced toward the sound but said nothing. Too quiet, Flora thought. Too controlled. Most men in his situation would be pacing, complaining, making calls. But Antonio sat perfectly still, one hand resting protectively on his son's shoulder, his eyes sweeping the room in slow, methodical passes. The door, the window, the narrow hallway leading to her bedroom. Like he was cataloging exits. You some kind of cop? She asked suddenly. His eyes met hers, unreadable. No. Soldier. A pause. Something like that. A long time ago. She didn't press further. Barella stirred, his face flushed and damp with sweat. He coughed again, harder this time, his small body convulsing with the effort. Flora was across the room before she realized she'd moved. He's burning up, Antonio said quietly, his hand on Barella's forehead. For the first time, real worry cracked through his composure. Flora knelt beside the couch, her earlier wariness forgotten. When did the fever start? This afternoon. It wasn't this bad before. She pressed the back of her hand to Barella's cheek. Hot. Too hot. I don't have medicine, she said, already moving. But I have ice. And clean cloths. She returned with a bowl of cold water and a stack of thin towels, kneeling beside the couch. She soaked one cloth, wrung it out, and gently pressed it to Barella's forehead. The boy whimpered softly, but didn't wake. Keep changing it every few minutes, Flora instructed, handing another cloth to Antonio. We need to bring the fever down. He took the cloth, their fingers brushing briefly. Thank you. She didn't respond, just focused on Barella's breathing, shallow but steady. Antonio worked beside her in silence, his movements precise and unhurried. He dampened the cloth, folded it carefully, placed it with exact gentleness. Everything he did was deliberate, efficient, like someone trained to stay calm under pressure. Who are you? Flora thought, watching him from the corner of her eye. Hours passed. The storm intensified, wind shrieking like a wounded animal. Flora's phone buzzed once, a single emergency alert. Citywide shutdown. All roads closed until further notice. Shelter in place. She showed Antonio the screen. He read it, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Then he looked at Barella, still feverish and fragile on the couch. Looks like one night just became longer, Flora said quietly. Antonio met her eyes, and for just a moment, she saw something flicker beneath his carefully maintained mask. Not fear. Gratitude. I'm sorry, he said softly. Flora looked at the sleeping boy between them, his small chest rising and falling. Just don't make me regret this, she whispered. Outside, the city vanished beneath the snow. And inside, 3 strangers sat in the half-dark, bound together by a storm neither of them could escape, and a truth Flora didn't yet know would change everything. The power went out just after midnight. Flora lit 2 candles she kept in the kitchen drawer, their small flames casting dancing shadows across the walls. The apartment fell into a softer darkness, intimate, almost peaceful despite the chaos outside. Barella's fever had finally broken an hour earlier, his breathing deeper now, more rhythmic. Flora sat on the floor beside the couch, a damp cloth in her hand, watching the rise and fall of his small chest. "You're good with him," Antonio said quietly from across the room. Flora glanced up. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his face half-lit by candlelight. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." "No," he said simply. "You're not." She looked back at Barella, gently brushing a strand of dark hair from his forehead. "He reminds me of my little brother." Before, she stopped herself. Before what? Flora was silent for a moment. "Before we got separated. Foster system. I aged out. He didn't." She swallowed hard. "I haven't seen him in 3 years." Antonio's expression softened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. That's just how life works for people like me." She adjusted the blanket around Barella. "You do what you can with what you have." His mother used to say the same thing, Antonio said quietly. Flora looked up. "Used to?" He nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "She passed 2 years ago. Cancer. By the time we knew, it was already—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. Barella was 4. He still asks about her sometimes. The rawness in his voice caught Flora off guard. This wasn't the controlled, measured man from earlier. This was a father carrying grief he couldn't show his son. "I'm sorry," she said softly. That's horrible. It's why I can't fail him," Antonio replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's all I have left." Flora felt something shift inside her chest, a wall she'd carefully built beginning to crack. "You're not failing him," she said. "You're here. You got him somewhere safe. That's what matters." Antonio held her gaze, and in the candlelight, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. Exhaustion. Yes, but also gratitude. Real, unguarded gratitude. "You didn't have to help us," he said. "After everything you've been through, you could have left us out there. But you didn't." "I almost did," Flora admitted. "A year ago, I let someone in. A man who seemed kind, who needed help. He stole everything I had and disappeared." She looked down at her hands. "I swore I'd never be that stupid again." "Then why did you open the door tonight?" Flora was quiet for a long moment, listening to the storm howl outside. "Because I saw your son," she said finally. "And I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." Antonio moved closer, sitting on the floor across from her with Barella between them. "You're stronger than you think. Or maybe just a fool twice over," she said with a sad smile. "No," he said firmly. "Kindness isn't foolish. It's rare. And he paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's the only thing worth protecting in this world." The way he said it sent a chill down Flora's spine. Not from fear, but from something deeper, a sense that this man understood darkness in ways she couldn't imagine. But in this moment, in this small, candlelit room, none of that mattered. Barella stirred slightly, mumbling something in his sleep before settling again. Flora smiled despite herself. "He's dreaming. Probably about you," Antonio said softly. "His angel in the storm." Flora's breath caught. The apartment, usually so cold, so empty, suddenly felt full. Warm. Alive. Like it hadn't felt in years. Outside, the wind screamed. But inside, something fragile and unexpected had begun to grow. And neither of them was ready to name it yet. Flora woke to silence. Not the violent howling of wind, not the rattle of windows, just silence. Pale gray light filtered through the curtains. The storm had finally passed. She sat up slowly, her neck stiff from sleeping in the chair. The candles had burned down to nothing. The apartment was cold again, the space heater barely making a dent in the chill. The couch was empty. Flora's heart lurched. She stood quickly, scanning the room. Antonio. No answer. She moved through the small apartment, kitchenette, bathroom, her bedroom. All empty. The towels she'd used for Barella were neatly folded on the counter. The mugs were washed and drying beside the sink. They were gone. Flora stood in the center of her apartment, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the couch where Barella had slept. The blanket was folded precisely, the pillow fluffed as if no one had been there at all. He didn't even say goodbye. She told herself it didn't matter, that this was better, cleaner. No awkward goodbyes, no false promises to stay in touch. They needed shelter. She'd provided it. That was the end of the story. So why did her chest ache like something had been ripped away? Flora walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. The street outside was buried under 2 feet of snow, pristine and untouched.
No footprints.
No tire tracks. It was as if Antonio and Barella had simply vanished into the white. She was about to turn away when she noticed it, a piece of paper on the small dining table, held down by something dark and rectangular. Flora approached slowly, her pulse quickening. The note was written in neat, controlled handwriting. Thank you for the warmth, for the kindness, for showing me that people like you still exist in this world. I'll never forget what you did for us. Beside it lay a black card. Flora picked it up carefully, turning it over in her hands. It was heavier than a normal credit card, the surface smooth and unmarked except for a small metallic chip and a series of embossed numbers. No name.
Nubank logo.
Just sleek, expensive black. Her hands trembled. She'd heard about cards like this, exclusive, unlimited access. The kind only the very wealthy carried. Who are you, Antonio? Flora sank into the chair, staring at the card and note. Part of her wanted to tear them both up, throw them away, forget any of this had happened. The other part, the part that had sat beside Barella all night, the part that had talked with Antonio by candlelight, wanted answers. But he was gone, and he hadn't left her a way to find him. Flora set the card on the table and stood, wrapping her arms around herself again. The apartment felt wrong now, too quiet, too empty. The walls seemed closer than before, the air thinner. For 2 days, this place had held 3 people. Laughter. Whispered conversations. The sound of a child breathing softly in sleep. Now it was just her again, just like it had always been. Flora walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching snow begin to fall again. Lighter this time, gentle flakes drifting down like forgotten memories. Goodbye, Barella, she whispered to the empty street. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the confusion and the hurt and the questions she'd never get to ask, she felt the sharp, undeniable ache of loss. Not for what she'd had, but for what she'd never know she wanted until it was already gone. 3 weeks later, Flora stood in the manager's cramped office at the diner, her hands clenched at her sides. I'm sorry, Flora, Mrs. Chen said, not quite meeting her eyes. Corporate's cutting hours across all locations. You're down to 2 shifts a week.
2.
Flora's voice cracked. Mrs. Chen, I can barely survive on 4. I know. I'm sorry. If it were up to me, she shook her head. I'll try to add you back when things pick up. Flora walked out into the cold February afternoon, her breath visible in the air. 2 shifts meant maybe $200 a month. Her rent alone was $800. The math didn't work. That night, her landlord slipped an eviction notice under her door. 60 days. Flora sat on her bed, staring at the paper until the words blurred. Then she opened the drawer of her nightstand and pulled out the black card, still in the same spot where she'd hidden it weeks ago. She turned it over in her hands, feeling its weight. 1 swipe, she thought. That's all it would take. Her finger traced the embossed numbers. Then she put it back in the drawer and slammed it shut. No, she said aloud to the empty apartment. I'm not that desperate yet. But desperation came faster than she expected. The electricity was shut off 3 days later. She'd missed 2 payments. Flora used candles at night and ate cold canned soup for dinner. She wore 2 sweaters and slept under every blanket she owned. When her phone service was disconnected, she told herself it didn't matter. No one called her anyway. On a gray Thursday morning, Flora walked into the only bank in her neighborhood, the black card wrapped in tissue paper inside her coat pocket. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, took the card and scanned it. Her expression changed immediately. "One moment, please." She disappeared into a back office. When she returned, an older man in a pressed suit followed her. "Miss," he said carefully, his voice low, "this is a very exclusive account. Private. High-level clearance." He glanced at the card again, then at Flora's worn coat and tired face. "May I ask how you acquired this?" "It was given to me," Flora said quietly. "I just want to know who it belongs to." The manager's eyes widened slightly. "I can't disclose account holder information. But I can tell you," he paused, choosing his words. "Whoever gave you this card has considerable resources and influence." "What kind of influence?" He handed the card back, his hand trembling slightly. "The kind most people only hear about in whispers." Flora walked home in a daze, the card burning a hole in her pocket. "Who are you, Antonio?" That night, she sat at her small table with the card in front of her, a single candle providing the only light. Her stomach ached from hunger. Her fingers were numb from cold. The eviction notice sat beside her, marked with red ink. Just one swipe. Flora picked up the card, held it for a long moment, then placed it back in the drawer. She pulled her thin blanket around her shoulders and stared at the candle flame, watching it flicker in the darkness. Outside, the city hummed with life. People in warm apartments, eating hot meals, their lights burning bright. And inside, Flora sat alone in the cold and the dark, holding on to the one thing she had left that money couldn't buy. Her dignity, even if it killed her. "The Open Door Initiative," Antonio said, sliding a folder across the polished conference table. "Housing assistance, job training, emergency shelter. All legitimate. All legal." Flora opened the folder slowly, scanning page after page of plans, budgets, partnership proposals. "This is extensive." "It's necessary," he replied. "And I want you to run it." She looked up sharply. "Me? I don't have any experience." "You have something better than experience." Antonio leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You understand what it means to need help and not receive it. To fall through every crack in the system. That's worth more than any degree." Flora set the folder down, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't know if I can do this."
Ido.
The certainty in his voice made her breath catch. She accepted 3 days later. Not for the salary, though it was more than she'd ever imagined earning. Not for the office or the security or the way Antonio looked at her when she walked into a room. She accepted because for the first time in years, someone believed she was capable of something more than just surviving. The first month was chaos. Flora and Antonio clashed constantly, her idealism against his pragmatism, her insistence on helping everyone against his need to prioritize results. In one heated meeting, she slammed her hand on the table. "These are people, not numbers on a spreadsheet. And if we don't manage the numbers properly," Antonio countered calmly, "we won't be able to help anyone at all." They stared at each other across the table, tension crackling in the air. Then Flora sighed. "What if we pilot the program in 3 neighborhoods first? Prove the model works before expanding?" Antonio's expression softened. "That's actually smart. Don't sound so surprised," she muttered. He smiled, a real smile that made him look younger, less guarded. "I'm not. Impressed, maybe, but not surprised." The tension shifted into something else. Something neither of them acknowledged aloud. Every morning, coffee waited on Flora's desk, 2 sugars, no cream, cinnamon on top. Antonio never mentioned it. She never asked. Some nights they worked late, the office empty except for distant security guards. Antonio would loosen his tie, roll up his sleeves, and they'd argue over policy details until the city lights blurred outside the windows. Once, Flora fell asleep at her desk, exhausted from a site visit. She woke to find Antonio's suit jacket draped over her shoulders, still warm. He was across the room, working silently, pretending not to notice, when she pulled the jacket closer. But Flora noticed other things too. The way certain calls made Antonio's jaw tighten. The security that shadowed her everywhere, always at a distance but always there. The careful way he never spoke about certain aspects of his business. "You're protecting me from something," she said one evening. Antonio looked up from his laptop. "Always." "From what?" "From people who wouldn't understand why you matter to me." The words hung between them, unfinished and dangerous. Flora's heart raced. "Antonio." "The gala is next month," he said, smoothly changing the subject. "Major donors, city officials, press. It's important we present a unified front for the initiative." She let it go.
For now.
But as the gala approached, whispers began. Flora heard them in restrooms, caught fragments in elevators. Staff members fell silent when she entered rooms. She saw the looks, curious, judgmental, speculative. She came out of nowhere, sleeping her way to the top probably. What does Vanny see in her anyway? The night before the gala, Flora stood alone in her new apartment, modest but safe, paid for by her salary, staring at the dress Antonio's assistant had delivered. Midnight blue. Elegant. Expensive. Her phone buzzed. A text from Antonio. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready." Flora looked at her reflection in the window, barely recognizing the woman staring back. Not the scared girl from Lincoln Park. Someone stronger. Someone still figuring out who she was becoming. She texted back, "I'll be there." Because whatever came next, whispers, judgment, the dangerous world Antonio inhabited, she'd opened that door months ago in a blizzard. And she wasn't about to close it now, even if she had no idea what waited on the other side. The ballroom glittered like something from another world, crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, men in tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than Flora used to make in a year. She stood near the edge of the room, the midnight blue dress feeling like armor and exposure all at once. Across the crowd, Antonio moved with quiet authority, shaking hands, speaking in low tones with city officials and donors. Every few minutes, his eyes found hers. Flora had just accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter when a woman in a sharp red pantsuit approached, a press badge clipped to her lapel. "Flora, isn't it?" the reporter said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're director of the Open Door Initiative." "That's right." Impressive rise. 6 weeks ago you were working part-time at a diner. The woman's smile sharpened. "Some people are saying your closeness to Mr. Vanny had something to do with your rapid promotion." Flora's grip tightened on her glass. Around them, conversations quieted. People were listening now. "Some people," Flora said carefully, "don't know what they're talking about." "So, you're denying there's a personal relationship?" "I'm saying my position was earned." The reporter leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper loud enough for others to hear. "Come on. A poor girl from Lincoln Park suddenly running a multi-million-dollar initiative? We both know how these things really work." Heat flooded Flora's face. Her hands trembled. She opened her mouth to respond. "That's enough." Antonio's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. He appeared at Flora's side, his presence commanding immediate silence. The reporter stepped back instinctively. "Mr. Vanty, I know exactly what you were doing," Antonio said, his tone ice-cold. Then he turned to face the crowd that had gathered, his hand moving to rest lightly on Flora's back, protective, public, deliberate. "Let me be very clear," he said, his voice carrying across the room. 6 months ago, when I had nothing, no power, no safety, no options, this woman opened her door to a stranger and his sick child in the middle of a blizzard. The room was utterly silent now. She fed us, cared for my son through the night, asked for nothing in return. His voice softened but lost none of its strength. Everything good this initiative represents, every life will change, every family will help, exists because of her character, her compassion, her courage. He looked at Flora, and the rawness in his eyes made her breath catch. She didn't earn this position by knowing me, Antonio continued, addressing the crowd again. I offered her this position because of who she is. And if anyone in this room questions her integrity again, they're questioning mine. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then someone began to clap. Then another. Then the entire room erupted in applause. The reporter slipped away, her face flushed with embarrassment. People approached Flora with apologies, with congratulations, with genuine smiles. But Flora barely noticed. She was looking at Antonio, who was looking back at her with an expression that made the rest of the world disappear. Later, when the speeches ended and the crowd dispersed into smaller groups, Flora found herself on the balcony overlooking the city. The cold February air was sharp against her skin. She heard footsteps behind her. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yes, Antonio replied, moving to stand beside her. I did. They stood in silence, watching the lights of Chicago stretch toward the horizon.
They'll talk more now, Flora said.
About us. Let them. She turned to face him. Antonio, I don't understand what this is. What we... She gestured helplessly between them. I don't even know what to call it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached for her hand. His fingers intertwined with hers. Warm, strong, certain. Neither do I, he admitted. But I know I don't want to let go. Flora's throat tightened. She squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of everything unspoken between them. Gratitude and attraction, fear and trust, past and future all tangled together. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. They stood there together, hands clasped in the darkness, the city glittering below them like a promise neither of them knew if they could keep. But for the first time in both their lives, they were willing to try. Winter returned gently to Lincoln Park. Snow fell in soft whispers, blanketing the familiar streets in white. Flora stood outside her old building, breath visible in the cold air, staring at the basement apartment door she hadn't seen in months. Why are we here? She asked. Beside her, Antonio adjusted Barella's scarf, the boy bouncing excitedly between them. You'll see. He produced a key, her old key, and unlocked the door. Flora stepped inside and froze. The apartment had been transformed. The cracked walls were repaired and painted warm cream. New windows blocked the drafts. The ancient radiator had been replaced with modern heating. But the layout remained the same, intimate, familiar, hers. Above the couch hung Barella's drawing in a simple frame. The golden-haired woman opening her door. You kept it, Flora whispered. This place matters, Antonio said quietly. It's where everything changed. Barella tugged Flora's hand. Miss Flora, look. My room. He pulled her down the hallway to the small bedroom, now painted sky blue with stars on the ceiling. A child's bed, toys, books carefully arranged. Flora's eyes burned. Antonio, what is this? Come outside for a moment, he said. There's something I need to show you. They stepped back into the hallway, Barella following close behind. Snow drifted past the single overhead light, just like that night months ago. Antonio stopped at the exact spot where he'd stood that night, desperate, soaked, carrying his sick son. The exact spot where Flora had opened the door. He knelt down slowly, and Flora's heart stopped. 6 months ago, Antonio said, his voice steady but soft, I knocked on this door with nothing. No plan, no hope, just fear for my son. He reached into his coat pocket. You could have left us in the cold. You had every reason to, but you didn't. He pulled out a small velvet box. You showed me that real power isn't control or money or fear. It's choosing kindness when it costs you everything. His eyes met hers, vulnerable and certain all at once. You taught me how to be human again. He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver band, elegant and understated. Read the inscription, he said. Flora took the ring with trembling hands, tilting it toward the light. Engraved inside in delicate script. Thank you for opening the door. Her vision blurred. Antonio. I can't promise you safety, he said honestly. My world is complicated and sometimes dangerous. But I promise you truth, loyalty, protection, and everything I am. He paused. Will you let me spend my life proving that opening this door was the best decision you ever made? Flora couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at this man, this powerful, dangerous, tender man, kneeling in the snow where their story began. She didn't answer with words. She pulled him up and wrapped her arms around him, holding him like she'd held his son that first night, tightly, completely, without reservation. Yes, she whispered against his shoulder. Yes. Barella cheered, throwing his small arms around both of them. Does this mean you're staying? Forever? Flora laughed through her tears, pulling back to look at Antonio as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Forever. Antonio cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away her tears. Thank you, he murmured. For everything. Thank you, she whispered back. For coming back. They stood there in the falling snow, three people who'd found each other in a storm, no longer strangers, no longer alone. The door behind them stood open, warm light spilling into the hallway. And Flora understood finally, deeply, that some doors aren't meant to be closed. Some doors lead to everything you never knew you needed. All you have to do is be brave enough to open them. Sometimes the most powerful thing in the world isn't money or control or fear. It's the courage to show kindness when it costs you everything. Because that single choice, that one open door, can change not just one life, but three. Forever. Sometimes the most powerful thing in the world isn't money or control or fear. It's the courage to show kindness when it costs you everything. Because that single choice, that one open door, can change not just one life, but three. Forever. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that one act of kindness can change everything, then subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because every week, we bring you stories that prove love, courage, and compassion are the most powerful forces in the world. Don't miss the next one.